There's something you need to understand about the people who seem unbreakable. The ones who move through chaos with a kind of calm that feels almost unnatural. It's not what you think. It's not confidence. It's not positive thinking. It's not even courage in the traditional sense. What they have is something far more powerful, something most people never develop because they've been taught to look for it in all the wrong places. Machiavelli spent his life studying power, not the kind you get from position or wealth, but the kind that comes from within. And buried in his observations is a secret that changes everything once you see it. The most powerful trait of people who truly trust themselves isn't something you can fake. It's not something you can buy. And here's the uncomfortable part. It's probably the opposite of what you've been conditioned to believe makes someone strong. See, society has sold you a particular version of self-trust that actually keeps you weak. You've been performing it, measuring it, seeking validation for it. And in doing so, you've moved further away from the real thing. But don't worry. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what separates those who merely appear confident from those who possess genuine inner sovereignty. More importantly, you're going to see the path to developing it yourself. We're going to dismantle some comfortable lies you've been told. We're going to explore why most people hesitate, even when they know exactly what to do. And we're going to look at the one quality that Machiavelli recognized as the difference between those who shape their destiny and those who get shaped by it. This is a motivational content. This is about understanding something fundamental about human nature that most people never grasp. Now, if you're tired of surface-level advice and you're ready for something that actually cuts to the truth, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now. It tells me you want more content like this, and it helps this message reach people who actually need to hear it. And subscribe if you haven't already, because we're building something different here. We're creating a space for people who want wisdom over validation, truth over comfort. So let's start where most people get this completely wrong. You've seen them everywhere, haven't you? Those people who walk into a room radiating what looks like unshakable confidence. They've got the right clothes, the right words, the perfect Instagram captions about living their truth. But here's what nobody tells you. Most of what we call confidence today is just elaborate theater. It's a performance designed to convince others. And somewhere along the way, we started trying to convince ourselves too. Real self-trust doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need an audience. The moment you're checking how your confidence looks from the outside, you've already lost the thread of what actual inner strength feels like. Think about it this way. When you were a kid and you climbed that tree in your backyard, you didn't stop halfway up to wonder if you looked confident doing it. You just knew, in your bones, in your gut, whether you could make it to the next branch. That's the difference we're talking about here. Modern confidence is about managing perception. True self-trust is about knowing your own capabilities so deeply that other people's opinions become background noise. Machiavelli understood this 5 centuries ago, and it's more relevant now than ever. We've built an entire culture around the appearance of self-reliance, while simultaneously destroying the conditions that create actual inner sovereignty. The social media age has turbocharged this problem in ways that would have fascinated Machiavelli. Every day, millions of people perform confidence for an audience of strangers, collecting little digital validations that feel like proof of self-trust, but are actually its opposite. You can't build genuine mental fortitude by counting likes. You can't develop real resilience by crafting the perfect response to every comment. What you're building instead is a house of cards, impressive from certain angles, but one strong wind away from collapse. The people who truly trust themselves, they're not worried about the wind. They've already been through storms that would have flattened the house of cards years ago. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. If you've spent years building your sense of self on external validation, the idea of actual self-trust feels terrifying. It means stepping away from the scoreboard. It means making decisions when nobody's watching to applaud them. It means being okay with choices that might make you look foolish, uncertain, or even weak to people who are still playing the confidence game. But that terror you're feeling, that's actually the doorway. That's where the real work begins. Because what Machiavelli knew What every person with genuine inner strength eventually learns is that self-trust isn't born in comfort and applause. Machiavelli gets a bad rap, doesn't he? Most people think he was just teaching princes how to be ruthless manipulators. But buried in his work is something far more valuable, a concept he called virtue. Now, this isn't virtue in the moral sense we use today. This is something rawer, more primal. Virtue is the capacity to act decisively in the face of fortune's chaos. It's the inner strength that allows you to shape circumstances instead of being shaped by them. Think of it as the difference between a tree that bends with the storm and one that snaps. Both face the same wind, but only one has the internal flexibility and rootedness to survive. Fortune, in Machiavelli's view, is everything outside your control. It's the economy crashing. It's the relationship ending. It's the diagnosis you didn't see coming. It's the opportunity that appears at the worst possible time. Fortune is relentless and unpredictable. And here's the kicker. It doesn't care about your plans, your morals, or your feelings. Most people spend their entire lives trying to predict fortune, control it, or hide from it. They build elaborate strategies to avoid uncertainty. They make decisions based on what seems safe. And then they wonder why they feel powerless when life inevitably throws them a curveball. Machiavelli would tell you that's backwards. You don't build self-trust by avoiding fortune. You build it by developing the virtue to dance with it. This is where modern self-help gets it completely wrong. We're sold this idea that confidence comes from positive thinking, affirmations, and visualizing success. But that's not self-reliance. That's wishful thinking dressed up in fancy packaging. Real inner sovereignty comes from knowing you can handle whatever fortune brings, not from convincing yourself that fortune will be kind. Machiavelli studied leaders who rose and fell, republics that thrived and collapsed, and he saw the pattern clearly. The ones who survived weren't the most moral, the most optimistic, or even the most talented. They were the ones with enough virtue to act when action was required, to adapt when adaptation was necessary, and to endure when endurance was the only option. Let me give you something concrete here. Imagine two people lose their jobs on the same day. Person A has spent years building what they think is confidence, the right LinkedIn profile, the perfect resume, a carefully crafted professional identity. When the job disappears, their entire sense of self crumbles because it was built on external circumstances. Person B has spent those same years developing virtue. They've faced smaller failures and learned from them. They've built skills that transfer across contexts. They've cultivated emotional control and mental fortitude. When the job disappears, they're not happy about it, but they're not destroyed either. They trust themselves to figure it out because they've done it before. That's not luck. That's not even confidence in the usual sense. That's self-trust forged in the real world, not in the mirror. From the moment you could understand language, people have been teaching you to distrust yourself. Think about it. What will the neighbors think? You need to fit in. Don't make waves. Play it safe. Every one of those messages, no matter how well-intentioned, was training you to look outside yourself for permission to exist. Your parents weren't evil. They were terrified. They knew the world punishes people who stand out, who trust their own judgment over the crowds. So they did what they thought was protective. They taught you to seek approval. And in doing so, they inadvertently handed you a prison sentence. School made it worse, didn't it? You learned quickly that the reward system had nothing to do with self-reliance. You got gold stars for compliance, for giving the answer the teacher wanted, for staying inside the lines. The kids who questioned too much, who followed their own curiosity, who couldn't sit still in the boxes we built for them, they got label problems. We took the natural inner sovereignty that every child has and systematically conditioned it out of them. By the time you hit adulthood, the trap was so complete you didn't even notice it anymore. You genuinely believed that checking with others before making decisions was wisdom. You thought needing consensus was being responsible. But Machiavelli would have seen it clearly. You'd become a servant to other people's fears. Here's what makes this particularly insidious. The approval trap doesn't feel like a trap when you're in it. It feels like community, like wisdom, like not being an arrogant jerk who thinks they know everything. And look, there's a grain of truth there. Listening to others can be valuable. Learning from people with more experience makes sense. But there's a massive difference between considering input and needing permission. When you can't make a decision without running it past 5 people first, that's not humility. That's outsourcing your inner strength. When you change course every time someone questions you, that's not flexibility. That's having no course at all. The really tragic part is how this kills resilience before you even face real adversity. If your sense of right action comes from external approval, what happens when the crowd is wrong? What happens when doing the right thing means disappointing people you care about? What happens when the path forward is clear to you, but invisible to everyone else? You freeze. You second guess. You wait for permission that never comes. And while you're waiting, life passes you by. The people with genuine self-trust, the ones Machiavelli would recognize as having virtue, they've learned to hear other voices without being controlled by them. They've built an internal compass strong enough to function even when every external voice is screaming in the opposite direction. That's not arrogance. That's what sovereignty actually means. You already know what you need to do, don't you? Right now, reading this, there's something in your life where the path forward is clear. Maybe it's a conversation you need to have. Maybe it's a job you need to leave. Maybe it's a habit you need to break or a dream you need to pursue. You've known for weeks, maybe months, maybe years. You've analyzed it from every angle. You've made pro and con lists. You've talked about it with friends who've given you the same advice repeatedly. And yet here you are, still stuck in the knowing phase, unable to cross over into the doing phase. This is where self-trust reveals itself most brutally, in the gap between knowledge and action. Machiavelli saw this paralysis everywhere he looked. Princes who knew their rivals were plotting against them, but hoped it would resolve itself. Republics that understood they needed military reform, but delayed until it was too late. Leaders who had all the information they needed, but couldn't pull the trigger on difficult decisions. He didn't judge them morally for this hesitation. He simply observed that hesitation itself was often the fatal flaw. Not wrong analysis, not bad information, just the inability to act on what you already know. And here's the uncomfortable truth. That paralysis doesn't come from lacking confidence. It comes from lacking self-trust. You don't believe, deep in your bones, that you can handle the consequences of your own decisions. Think about what's really happening in that gap. You know what to do, but you're running endless simulations trying to find a version where everyone approves, where nothing goes wrong, where the outcome is guaranteed. You're trying to achieve certainty before action. But life doesn't work that way. And somewhere inside, you know it. Every person who's ever done anything significant has done it without certainty. They had self-reliance instead. They trusted that whatever happened, they'd figure it out. That's not recklessness. That's the opposite. Recklessness doesn't consider consequences. Mental fortitude considers them fully and acts anyway. It's the difference between jumping off a cliff blindfolded and climbing down a dangerous path with your eyes wide open. Here's what might sting a bit. Every day you spend in that paralysis, you're training yourself not to trust yourself. You're reinforcing the neural pathway that says, I know, but I can't. You're building a habit of hesitation, and habits compound. The person who hesitates on small decisions finds themselves paralyzed by big ones. The person who needs external validation before sending an email will need it before making life-changing moves. But it works in reverse too. When you act on what you know, even in small ways, even when it's uncomfortable, you build evidence for yourself. You prove to yourself that you can trust your judgment. That's how inner sovereignty actually develops. Not through affirmations or visualization, but through the accumulated evidence of acting on your own authority and surviving the results. Let me tell you something that might shift your entire perspective on self-trust. It's not built on being right. It's built on being able to handle being wrong. Read that again, because this is where most people get completely turned around. They think self-reliance means having all the answers, making perfect decisions, never failing. That's not inner strength. That's brittleness disguised as confidence. The people who truly trust themselves have something far more valuable. They've learned that they can survive their own mistakes. They've built resilience, not certainty, as their foundation. Machiavelli understood this deeply. He watched leaders rise and fall, and the pattern was clear. The ones who crumbled weren't necessarily the ones who made the worst decisions. They were the ones who couldn't adapt when their decisions didn't work out. They'd built their entire identity on being right, on appearing infallible, on never showing weakness. So when fortune turned against them, and it always does eventually, they had no flexibility. They snapped instead of bending. Compare that to leaders who'd already failed publicly, who'd made visible mistakes and recovered. Those leaders had developed what Machiavelli would call virtù through adversity. They knew something their perfect counterparts didn't. Failure isn't the end of self-trust. Sometimes it's the beginning. This is why the modern obsession with positive thinking and success culture is so dangerous. We've created an environment where people are terrified of being wrong, of making mistakes, of looking foolish. So they don't try. They stay in jobs they hate because at least they're succeeding at them. They avoid difficult conversations because they can't guarantee the outcome. They stick with safe choices because safe feels like control. But here's the paradox. By avoiding failure, they ensure they'll never develop the emotional control and mental fortitude that come from going through failure and emerging intact. They're trying to build self-trust without ever testing whether they can actually trust themselves. It's like trying to build muscle without ever lifting anything heavy. I want you to imagine two different approaches to life. Path A. You make only decisions you're certain about. You avoid risks. You stay inside your comfort zone. You protect your winning streak. On the surface, this looks like someone with strong self-reliance. But what happens when life forces you into uncertainty? When a pandemic hits, when the industry changes, when relationships end, when health fails? You've got no practice handling the unpredictable. You've built your house on sand. Path B. You make decisions even when you're uncertain. You try things that might not work. You have difficult conversations that might go badly. You accumulate small failures and learn from them. You build up scar tissue. When life inevitably brings chaos, you've already been through versions of chaos before. You've got evidence that you can handle it. That's not optimism. That's not even confidence. That's genuine inner sovereignty earned through experience. Nobody wants to hear this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Comfort is the enemy of self-trust. Not because suffering is noble or because struggle builds character in some vague, motivational poster kind of way, but because genuine inner strength cannot be developed in environments where nothing is at stake. You can read every philosophy book ever written. You can understand Machiavelli's concepts intellectually. You can have a PhD in resilience theory. But until you've actually been through something that tested you, really tested you, down to your core, you don't know if you can trust yourself. You're operating on theory, not evidence. Think about the people you know who have unshakable self-reliance. I mean, really think about them. Chances are, they've been through something. Maybe it was a brutal divorce that forced them to rebuild their entire life. Maybe it was losing everything financially and having to start over. Maybe it was a health crisis that stripped away all illusions of control. Maybe it was years of solitude where they had to face themselves without distraction. Whatever it was, they went into the forge. And here's what the forge does. It burns away everything that isn't essential. All the performance, all the pretense, all the confidence built on favorable circumstances. What remains is either nothing, or it's something real. It's virtù in Machiavelli's sense. It's the part of you that can function when everything else is stripped away. This is why adversity is such a reliable teacher. It doesn't let you lie to yourself. When everything's going well, you can maintain all sorts of illusions about your capabilities, your emotional control, your mental fortitude. You can convince yourself you'd handle crisis well because you've never actually had to handle one. But when you're in the middle of genuine chaos, when the job is gone, when the relationship ended, when the diagnosis came back, when the business failed, there's nowhere to hide. You find out very quickly whether your self-trust was real or just favorable circumstances wearing a disguise. And look, sometimes you find out it wasn't real. Sometimes you discover you're more fragile than you thought. But even that discovery is valuable. Because now you know. Now you have accurate information about where you actually stand. Here's what makes this particularly powerful. Once you've been through real adversity and survived it, something shifts fundamentally. Not immediately. There's usually a period of processing, of integration, of making sense of what happened. But eventually, you realize you've gained something that can't be taken away. You got evidence. Not hope, not theory, not positive affirmations. Actual lived evidence that when things fell apart, you found a way through. Maybe it wasn't graceful. Maybe you made mistakes along the way. Maybe you needed help from others. But you did it. And that evidence becomes the bedrock of genuine inner sovereignty. The next time fortune turns against you, and it will, you're not facing it as someone who's theoretically capable. You're facing it as someone who's already done hard things. That completely changes the equation. That's how people develop the kind of self-trust that Machiavelli recognized as the difference between those who shape their destiny and those who get shaped by it. So what does it actually look like to become the ruler of your own inner kingdom? Let's get concrete here, because this isn't some mystical state reserved for philosophers and monks. It's a way of operating in the world that anyone can develop, though few actually do. Being sovereign over yourself means you've taken complete ownership of your internal state. Not control in the sense of suppressing emotions or pretending difficulties don't exist, but ownership in the sense that you recognize your thoughts, feelings, and reactions as your responsibility. Nobody else can make you feel anything. Nobody else can make you think anything. They can apply pressure, sure. They can create circumstances. But your internal response? That's your domain, and you govern it absolutely. This is where most people immediately object. But what about trauma? What about mental illness? What about circumstances genuinely outside my control? And yes, those are real. Machiavelli would call those fortune, the external factors you didn't choose and can't fully control. But here's the subtle distinction. Having a diagnosis doesn't mean you've lost sovereignty. Facing difficult circumstances doesn't make you powerless. The question is whether you're actively governing your inner kingdom or whether you've handed the keys to whatever external force is loudest. The person with genuine self-trust can acknowledge their depression and still choose how they respond to it. They can recognize their trauma and still decide who they're becoming. That's not toxic positivity. That's the difference between being a victim of your circumstances and being someone who's facing circumstances you didn't choose with whatever agency you actually have. Let's talk about emotional control for a second, because this gets misunderstood constantly. Emotional control doesn't mean not having emotions. It means your emotions don't have you. It means you can feel anger without becoming anger. You can experience fear without being paralyzed by fear. You can sit with uncertainty without needing to immediately resolve it. This is one of the clearest markers of inner sovereignty, the ability to have a strong emotional reaction and not immediately act on it. Not forever, not a suppression, but just long enough to choose your response instead of being driven by reaction. The people who've developed this kind of mental fortitude have something that looks like a superpower in our reactive culture. They can be insulted without needing to insult back. They can face criticism without collapsing or attacking. They can sit in discomfort without desperately seeking escape. Here's where this all comes together. When you're truly the ruler of your inner kingdom, you stop needing the external world to arrange itself in your favor. You can prefer certain outcomes. You're not detached from life like some caricature of a Stoic philosopher. But your inner stability doesn't depend on getting those outcomes. You've built something deeper than circumstantial happiness. You've built self-reliance so fundamental that it persists regardless of what fortune brings. Bad things can still happen to you. You can still fail, still face loss, still encounter circumstances you wouldn't choose. But underneath all of that, there's a core that remains intact. Not because you're special or enlightened, but because you've done the work of building genuine inner strength through all the things we've been talking about. through facing the approval trap and choosing your own authority, through acting on what you know instead of waiting for certainty, through going through adversity and learning you can survive it, through taking complete ownership of your internal state. That's what Machiavelli meant by virtue. That's what separates people who trust themselves from people who merely appear confident. And that's what's possible for you if you're willing to do the actual work instead of just reading about it. So here we are. You just spent the last however many minutes exploring what real self-trust actually looks like. And I'm willing to bet something shifted for you along the way. Maybe you recognize yourself in the approval trap. Maybe you saw how you've been confusing confidence with performance. Maybe you realized you've been waiting for certainty that's never going to come. Whatever it was, here's the critical question. What are you going to do with this understanding? Because here's the thing about knowledge. It's completely worthless until you act on it. You can watch this video, nod along, feel inspired for about 15 minutes, and then go right back to seeking external validation. You can understand intellectually what Machiavelli meant by virtue and still live like someone who's never heard the concept. The gap between knowing and doing, that's where most people spend their entire lives. That's where dreams go to die. That's where self-trust remains forever theoretical. So let me ask you directly, where in your life are you hesitating right now? Where are you waiting for permission, for certainty, for the perfect moment? What conversation do you need to have? What decision do you need to make? What part of your life needs you to show up with actual inner sovereignty instead of perform confidence? I'm not asking rhetorically. I want you to think about it right now. Because if you can't identify at least one area where this applies, you're lying to yourself. We all have those places where we know what we need to do, but we're stuck in paralysis. Here's my challenge to you. Pick one thing. Just one. Not your entire life. Not some massive transformation. One decision, one action, one conversation where you're going to trust yourself instead of seeking approval. Do it this week. Do it badly if you have to. Do it scared, but do it from a place of inner authority rather than external validation. And then pay attention to what happens. Not just the outcome, but how it feels to act on your own judgment. That's how you start building real self-reliance. Not through inspiration, but through evidence. Now, if this resonated with you, if it challenged something you needed challenged, I need you to do something for me. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell. Because we're not here to make you feel good. We're here to help you think clearly about things that matter. We're building a community of people who value wisdom over validation, truth over comfort. And the algorithm needs to know that this kind of content matters to you. Every subscription, every like, every comment tells YouTube that there's an audience for depth, for intellectual honesty, for philosophy that actually applies to real life. Leave a comment and tell me, what's the one area where you're going to start practicing real self-trust this week? What are you done waiting for permission to do? I read every comment, and I want to know where you're at with this. Because this isn't just content. This is a conversation about becoming the kind of person who can handle whatever fortune brings. You've got one life, one chance to develop genuine inner strength. The question isn't whether you understand the concept now. The question is whether you're going to become the ruler of your inner kingdom, or whether you're going to spend your life as a subject to other people's opinions, to fortune's whims, to circumstances you refuse to govern. Machiavelli would tell you the choice is yours. I'm telling you the same thing. The path is clear. The only question is whether you'll walk it.